Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Now, alhamdulillah, Rabbil Alamin. So I'm with one of my big sheikh today, and it's a great pleasure for me to be with him today. It's Dr. Sanusi Lafiagi. So I want him to speak to us about the Quran today, so that we all can try to implement his sayings in our daily life. Assalamu alaikum, sir.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Now, sir, I want to talk to my viewers about the Quran, the benefit of memorizing the Quran, and why the Quran is important to all Muslims, why Allah has sent down the Quran for all the Muslims.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. It's a pleasure to have you, and I want to appreciate you for everything you are doing to promote the Quran recitation culture among the Muslims. It's one of the things that are lacking in society today, and one of the complaints of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when he says, وَقَالَ الرَّسُولُ يَا رَبِّ إِنَّ قَوْمِ اتَّخَذُوا هَذَا الْقُرْآنَ مَهْجُورًا. So the Prophet complained to Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that the people have abandoned the Quran. They have abandoned its recitation and the implementation of its laws in their lives. So when we have young brothers like you coming up to revive this culture among the Muslims, it is something that the Ummah greatly needs at this time and will benefit from. The Noble Quran is the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, with which He has sent Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam to mankind. It is to serve as one, a guide to the right path, and also a light, nur, in their minds, to illuminate their minds to see the true monotheism and also the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Quran is also a bashir, a bringer of good news, glad tidings to those who believe in Allah and who implement the laws of the Quran in their lives. And it is also a nazir, a plain warner to all of those who refuse to believe in Allah or to act in obedience to His rules. So the glorious Quran is the constitution of the Muslims. It is something we must live by its provisions. So the scholars have mentioned that Almighty Allah named His book Quran because it is an oft repeated book, or a book that contains oft repeated verses. Oft repeated verses means verses that must be recited on and on and on. It's not something you read once and that is it. The reason why the Quran is so important in our lives is that when you look at the totality of the contents of the Quran, from its alif to its ya, you realize that it is not just about the guidance to what is right in this world, but it is also about about laying the foundations that would help us to attain the felicity and prosperity of the hereafter. I do tell people that no matter how long you live on the surface of the earth, you are going to live beneath the earth for times hundreds of it. Take for instance, the Prophet lived for just 63 years. Hijrah today is 1,444 years. Do the math. So that is what will happen. So at the end of the day, it is about how much of the Quran have we implemented in our lives. Almighty Allah called the Quran Shifa, that the Quran is Shifa lima fi sudur. It is a cure for whatever ailment one feels. It could be physical ailment. The Quran contains how do we address the physical ailment you are suffering. For instance, it tells us in Surah An-Nahl that in the honey is medicine that cures our ailments, right? Yes. Then it's also spiritual ailments. We use it's also a spiritual cure, or it's also a cure for our spiritual, let me take it like that. It's also a cure for our spiritual ailments. So you see that Almighty Allah revealed verses and chapters in the Quran that we recite for at-ta'weez, when we seek protection, for Ayatul Kursi, Aman al-Rasul, Kulat Barabi Falak, Kulat Barabi Nas, among other chapters in the Quran like that we are to recite either in our palms, we rub it on our face, or recite in water and drink or bathe with it, or recite when we're going to bed at night or when we wake up in the morning. All of these are examples of how the Quran is important to our lives, be it the spiritual aspect of our lives or the mundane aspect of our lives. So we must also strive to recite the Quran and memorize it, because the Prophet ﷺ said, for each letter of the Quran that you recite, you get 10 rewards. So when you say Alif, Lam, Mim, that's 3 letters. 10, 10, 10, that's 30 rewards. Now imagine how much reward you get when you recite a whole page of the Quran just in a sitting or in a day. Now if you keep to reciting the Quran, maybe 1 hizbu per day or 1 juzu, as you know, depending on your time, imagine how much reward you are accumulating for yourself in the year after. So the Quran culture is something we have to revive. The memorization of the Quran is very simple. Allah says, وَلَقَدْ يَسَّرْنَا الْقُرْآنَ لِلذِّكْرِ فَهَلْ مِن مُدَّكِرٍ. We have made the Quran easy for remembrance. So the dhikr here is not just about remembering its rules and regulations, but also memorization. It is very simple to memorize the Quran, and it is also very easy to forget if you don't do muraja. That's why we have to that's why we have to encourage people to do 3 things. Number 1, recite the Quran daily. Number 2, try and memorize as much of it as you can. And number 3, do muraja daily, so that you don't forget what you have memorized. So in all, reciting the Quran has great spiritual benefit, emotional benefit. Some of the scholars say, Man arada mu'nisan fal Qur'an yakfihi. Whoever needs someone to interact with, someone to tell your problems, to pour your out to, then the Quran is there for you. Anytime you recite the Quran, you get moved. Even if you don't know the meanings of the verses being recited, you get moved. It moves you to tears. The Quran, you know, drives a kind of emotion that moves you to tears, to remembrance of Allah, to obedience to Allah. So as Muslims, we have to encourage this culture amongst ourselves, so that we build a community of pious people, conscious people, people that are closer to their Lord, and people that would try as much as they can to implement the rules of the Quran in their daily lives. And this will also go a long way in uprooting the immorality and corruption in society, because once you know that the Quran is going to be a witness for you or a witness against you on the day of judgment, then it kind of tells you that no, you can't do this wrong. The Prophet ﷺ said, the Prophet ﷺ said, As-siyamu wal-Quran yashfi'ani al-abdi yawm al-qiyamah. Fasting and the Quran shall intercede for the servant of Allah on the day of judgment. Some will say, my Lord, he spends his time engaging in me. He abandoned his food and water for your sake through me. Allow me to intercede for him today, to beg you to forgive him. The Quran will come and say, my Lord, day and night he was reciting me your words. Give me permission to intercede for him today before you, my Lord. And Allah will say, okay, go ahead and intercede. So imagine how much of your sins fasting and the Quran will take away from you. So imagine how easy salvation will come to you on the day of judgment, simply because you engaged in reciting the Quran. So that is how important the Quran is to our lives. Now,
MashaAllah. So sir, there is one thing, a lot of people used to send me message, like old people who are like above 40, 50, and others, like, you know, it's hard for them to like sit down again and start memorizing the Quran. You know, they have kids, they have a lot of things to do and everything that they wish to do it, but they don't have the time, and it's hard for them because they have a lot of that thinking about. So what advice would you give to those kind of people that wish to memorize the Quran?
The first thing is that, and this is why I said it is important to revive the Quran culture amongst our people. You know, the work you are doing now is kind of a spiritual awakening for a whole lot of people. They are now beginning to see the beauty of memorizing the Quran, and to the extent that they feel let down, that they've let themselves down by not doing it when they were young. So the first thing is, as young people, we should remember that a time is coming when we may be too busy too preoccupied with life challenges to start memorizing the Quran. So the time is now. That's for the young people. The time to memorize the Quran is now. So when you are young, between the ages of 7, 8, 9, 10, before you attain 40, which is the fullness of maturity, try as much as you can to memorize the Quran. If you can't memorize the entirety of the Quran, then at least a large portion of the Quran. And we have many scholars of the Quran around, and many madrasa where you can actually memorize the Quran. For those who are old, yes, it's a challenge, because you have to work hours in a day to put food on the table. You have kids to take care of, you have parents, so it may be difficult, but then it is not also impossible. You can spare time. We have people who teach the Quran online now, online madrasa for the Quran. You can spare time and enroll. Try and begin from the smaller chapters of the Quran. You can begin from downwards, not from Baqarah. So from downwards, try and start memorizing little by little. By the time you are able to memorize those short verses, memorizing the long verses will not be difficult. But to start is what is more important. Just start. Don't feel despair. Don't give up. Giving up is not an option for the Muslim when it comes to the Quran, because you are doing an act of ibadah. And because we're striving for the same Jannah, the young and the old will enter the same Jannah. There is no separate Jannah for the young and the old. So my advice is just start. Yes, it will be difficult. Yes, you don't have the time, but you can really spare 1 or 2 hours in a day and you do your muraja. Keep it up like that. I'm very sure that in the next couple of years, if you have not been able to memorize the entire Quran, then a substantial part of the Quran you have memorized. So they should not give up.
No.
It is never too late.
MashaAllah. So I have another question. So basically, it's like something that I've experienced. When I was done with secondary school, then my mom was like, I should memorize the Quran. I had a lot of our friends and family. They were like, how would you ask your child to memorize the Quran? The most important thing for him now is for him to go to school. That why will you jetting his school for Quran, issue, and there are still people that actually have that thinking that, giving the Quran, allowing your child to memorize the Quran first before any other thing is bad and everything. So I wanted to advise those people and let them do why the Quran should be more important than any other thing.
You see, one has to be grateful to Allah for giving him such a parent like your mom that encouraged you to go and memorize the Quran first before continuing your education. As Muslims, we must understand that this is the only legacy that we can give to our children that will be everlasting. Any other legacy, wealth, honor, whatever, would end one day. But the legacy of Islam, of the Quran, is something that your children will live with. And so long as they continue to recite the Quran and live by its injunctions, you also get a share of the reward. The Prophet said, Adallu ala al-khair kafa'ilihi. Whoever guides another to goodness, a good act, is just like the doer. That is, it will get equal reward with the doer without affecting the reward of the doer. So as Muslim parents, I want to advise that side by side with going to school, we should encourage our children to also be attending madrasa. Sometimes it may be difficult to attend physical madrasa because of the nature of environment, like those living in Lagos, for example. It might not be an easy ride. Then we can get an online tutor of the Quran to be taking your children the Quran side by side with the Western education. Then personally, my own philosophy is, my children are going to school now and they are attending the madrasa, Sheikh Idris madrasa, Sheikh Idris Abdul Karim. He's one of the best so far we have around. So, but when they complete their primary education, my plan is they will not proceed to secondary school without completing the Quran memorization. So they will go for a 2-year course, fully Quran. They memorize the Quran, and then they can proceed to secondary school. There is no rush. Nowadays, our children even start schools before the age of 4. Back in the days, some of us were 5, 6 before we started attending primary school. So now that our children are attending school at a relatively young age, it's even easier for them to bring the two together, and they can advance to the university even with their age mates. So my advice is, after primary school, you should allow your children to spend at least a year or two in Quran memorization schools, where they perfect their memorization before proceeding to in secondary school. It's much more of a higher education than the primary school, so they get busier, they get more engrossed in studies, but the Quran remains with them. So they continue like that. So that is the best thing for a Muslim parent. Don't be too hasty to get your children to secondary school, to the university. Think about an everlasting legacy that you can give them, one that you continue to reap from even after you have died. And what legacy is better than the memorization of the glorious Quran? MashaAllah. The Prophet ﷺ said, on the day of judgment, the memorizer of the Quran will intercede for his parents. So imagine this, imagine such fadila, such honor being done to you, that your child memorized the Quran and he acts upon the injunctions of the Quran. On the day of judgment, he's going to intercede and say, my father, my mother, let me intercede for you on this day.
So yeah, and sir, this thing that actually happens now, that I've seen just yesterday. One brother was talking to him about someone that went to memorize the Quran. Now when he got back, he's now into Yahoo and doing a lot of sorts, and I was like, subhanallah, So I wanted to tell the Hufaz that are watching this, the consequence of not acting by what they have memorized, and what Allah is going to do to them, because they have the knowledge, and Allah has blessed, because I know that memorizing the Quran is not everybody can be able to memorize the Quran. It's just a gift from Allah. So not using that gift accordingly, what will they, what are they going to face with that?
Well, it is important to note that memorizing the Quran does not necessarily imply 100% morality, because people have their personality, and then they have their public appearance, or maybe the knowledge they've acquired. So because we see one or a couple of Hufaz al-Quran doing immorality, does not mean that that is what all of them are, on the one hand, and it doesn't also mean that okay, so that's on the one hand, and on the other hand, it also does not mean that any memorizer of the Quran cannot fall into such acts. So, but what is important is they should understand the gravity of the Quran that they've memorized. See what Almighty Allah says about the Quran. لو أنزلنا هذا القرآن على جبل لرأيته خاشعا متصدعا من خشية الله. Had we revealed this Quran on a mountain, you would have seen the mountain so humbled and crumbled out of the fear of Allah. So it shows that the weight of the Quran, the gravity of the Quran is such that had Allah revealed it at once to Prophet ﷺ, it would have caused him discomfort. So Almighty Allah revealed the Quran in piecemeal, and he said the kuffar will say, "Lawla unzila alayhi al-Quran jumlatan wahida." The kuffar said, why didn't Allah reveal the Quran to him at once? Allah said, "Kadhalika linuthabbita bihi fuadak." We reveal it in piecemeal so as to put your mind at rest. It means that the Prophet cannot carry the whole Quran at a go because of the gravity. Now imagine someone that Allah has blessed to have the entire Quran memorized, not acting according to its rule. So my advice to the Hufaz is they should always remember the amana of the Quran, that they are carrying with them the words of Allah. Number two, they should also remember that their personality will no doubt impact the society negatively. People will say, hey, see, he memorized the Quran, see what he's doing. Because by memorizing the Quran, people see you as afar. People see you as someone that should fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Almighty Allah says, إِنَّمَا يَخْشَى اللَّهَ مِنْ عِبَادِهِ الْعُلَمَاءِ. Hamil al-Quran is one of the ulama. The Prophet ﷺ said that it is part of inna min ijlalillahi ta'ala, it is part of honoring Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, ikrama dhi shaybatin muslim, to honor a Muslim that has grown gray beard as a result of, and is a Muslim as a result of old age. He has grown gray beard. He now mentioned Wahamil al-Quran, and the person that has memorized the Quran. Another way was Swahib al-Quran. So imagine that honoring the memorizers of the Quran is part of honoring Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and this memorizer is full of immorality. So your personality will impact on the society negatively. People will say, subhanallah, say this. So they should also fear that. Number 3, they should fear those who imitate them. Because some people will look at Hamil Quran and say, well, if he can do it, then it means it is not wrong. There are people that will not come and ask you a question that, sorry, I want to ask, is this right or wrong? They will just start quoting you, Shebi Ustaz Labadas is doing it. So the fact that you are doing it, people start doing it. Prophet Solomon said that Man sanna fil Islam is sunnatan hasana, whoever starts a good tradition in Islam, some of the scholars say it means man ahya, whoever revives a good practice, good tradition, will have the reward for doing it and the reward of everybody imitating him till the day of judgment. He now said the other one too. Wa man sanna sunnatan sayyi'a fa alayhi wizruha. Whoever lays down a bad tradition in Islam, he would reap from the sin, wa wizru man amila biha ila yawm al-qiyamah, and the sin of whoever imitates him to the day of judgment. So fear imitation of the ignorant and gullible who see you as a guide, and whatever you do, they follow. Most importantly, fear the cause of the Quran itself. By memorizing the Quran, you are carrying the amana of the words of Allah. The words of Allah will either be a cause for you or a praise for you. The Prophet said on the day of judgment, La tazulu qadama abdin yawm al-qiyamati hatta yus'ala an arba'in. On the day of judgment, nobody shall take a step forward before answering 4 questions. An umrihi fima afnahu, about his life. How did you live your life? Wa an jismihi fima abla, about his body. How did he use his body from young age till he became old? Wa an ilmihi madha amila bihi, your knowledge. What did you do with your knowledge? Now, your knowledge of the Quran, of halal and haram, of what is right and what is wrong, how did you use it? Wa an malihi min ayna iktasaba wa fima anfaqa, his wealth. How did you amass it and how did you disburse it? So, but the third one is the important one, your knowledge. The knowledge of the Quran, how did you use it? And finally, they should also remember that not everyone is blessed with memorizing the Quran. So the few ones that have been blessed are the chosen ones. And it is a name of Allah. If it were not a name, then everybody should have it. But because it's a name of Allah, يَخْتَصُّ بِرَحْمَتِهِ مَنْ يَشَاءُ. Allah only chooses those who He wants to bestow his rahmah upon. On the day of judgment, وَلَا تُسْأَلُنَّ يَوْمَئِذٍ عَنِ النَّعِيمِ. On that day, you shall be asked about the blessings that Allah has bestowed on you. Now, when Allah asks you about the blessing of being able to memorize the Quran among hundreds, if you gather 100 people now, maybe just 1 or 2 are memorizing the Quran. In every 100, there are very few. So imagine having such ni'mah. On the other hand, Allah asks you, how did you use my ni'mah, my special grace that I have endowed you with? So what would the answer be? So this is why the Huffaz al-Quran, the Hummal al-Quran, they should be very careful with how they behave, both in private and public. I just remembered one thing. The Prophet ﷺ said, Inna lillahi ahalina minan nas. Almighty Allah has people of His among His creatures. Ahali, like, I don't want to call it family, so somebody will not misinterpret and say he said Allah has a family. But ahalina means special people. Allah has special people. The Sahaba said, Man hum ya Rasulallah, who are those? What did he say? He said, Ahlul Quran hum ahlullahi wa khassatuhu. Ahlul Quran, the memorizers of the Quran, those who act in accordance with the injunctions of the Quran, they are ahlullah, the special people of Allah. Wa khassatuhu. Khassa means someone that is so precious, so special, so important to you. So imagine being one of the precious and most important people to Allah, and you are disappointing Him because of your bad behavior. So they should be careful with their habits, both in public and private.
So finally, I want you to just give advice to the Ummah at large, just any advice.
We live in a time that the Prophet ﷺ said, a time is coming when fahsha would be widespread on the surface of the earth. The time is coming when a man would not care where his source of wealth comes from. I'm in halalin, I'm haram. A time is coming when fitna will be so widespread that the killer will not know why he is killing, nor would the killed know why he was killed. A time is coming when a man will pass by the grave of another and will say, Ya laytani makanahu. I wish I were in his place because of fitna. The Prophet said, a time is coming when fitna will descend like darkness of the night descends on the earth. It means it will take over everywhere. Nobody will be free from fitna. So as Muslims, my advice is we live in a time of fitna, a time of great distraction. People are being distracted from the path of Allah. Immorality is widespread. People no longer care where their source of income comes from, whether it's halal or haram. The life of human beings do not matter to a lot of people now. Whatever they can do to get money, they don't care. Immorality, taking the life of another, destroying other people's life and property, people don't really care. But as Muslims, we must always remember that we owe the Ummah a responsibility. When I say the Ummah, I mean the entire human race, not just the Muslim community now. We owe the entire human race the responsibility of portraying Islam in the best possible ways through our actions and our words. So let us beware of falling into fitna. Basma is doing a great job promoting the Quran reading culture among the people. This is what we expect of Muslims. Let's promote content that have values, content that would impact positively on the lives of the Muslims, both spiritually and morally. There are Muslims on the internet today who do not care the kind of content they feed the people with, so long as it brings them money, so long as it brings them shares and likes and good comments from people. We should know that on the day of judgment, we're going to be called to account for our wealth, how we amassed it and how we spent it. So, and for those of us that are also on the social media space, not not producing content, but probably promoting other people's content and watching it, let us know that on the day of judgment, Allah is going to ask us questions about the things we look at with our eyes, the things we hear with our ears. So let us be careful of the kind of content that we feed our eyes and our ears with. Almighty Allah says that on the day of judgment, inna sam'a wal basara wal fu'ada kullu ulaika kana anhu mas'ula. Allah will put questions to our ears, our eyes, our minds. So how are we going to answer the questions that Allah puts to these limbs? And on that day, our mouth shall be sealed. Al-yawma nakhtimu ala afwahihim. Our mouth shall be sealed. وَتُكَلِّمُنَا أَيْدِيهِمْ. Our fingers shall speak to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He used me to scroll to watch haram content. He sees Basmad and other people promoting Islamic content. It doesn't look at their content. What matters to him are funny content that promotes immorality, illegality, among other things. So my advice is let us use our gadgets, our data in a manner that on the day of judgment, they will not be a source of punishment for us before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
So I want to use this medium also to appreciate you for what you have been doing. I've been following you for years. Before I even started Basmat, I've known Dr. Sanusi, and I follow what you are doing, and I pray that Allah makes it an hujjah for you, not an hujjah against you. And Allah continue to bless you, and I pray that Allah rewards you abundantly. And also I want to thank you for giving me your time and giving me this, even though it was an impromptu stuff, but Allah reward you abundantly for giving me your time. Jazakumullahu khair.
Thank you very much. Alhamdulillah.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi.